February marks the celebration of Black History Month, through which we honor and commemorate the leaders and contributors of our Black communities and neighbors across the country. While voting rights and fair treatment are rightfully emphasized, there's a lesser talked about component of civil rights: food justice. On this episode, I speak with Tambra Stevenson, founder and CEO of Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture, or WANDA. Tambra brings a unique and insightful perspective on the key role that food, nutrition, culture, and culinary history have and are playing in the struggle for justice across the country in both historical and modern practice. She also describes the work that WANDA is doing and how everyday people can participate in building up a community and culture of justice around kitchen tables and beyond. Tambra, welcome to the Voices to End Hunger podcast, and happy Black History Month.
Thank you. Same to you as well. Happy to be here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we jump into our substantive questions, I'd love to get to know a little bit about you. I hear you have quite the story to tell about your time in Oklahoma to where you are today and what drove you to take up the mantle of food, nutrition, culture, history, and health as key pillars in the fight for justice.
I think for many of us who come to this work, food can either echo pain or pleasure. For me, it was pain and seeing diet-related diseases impacting family members that I loved, like my grandmother, Minnie Mae Crawford, who passed while I was in high school from complications of diabetes. We have a phrase, or at least maybe it's just back home, if I'm gonna die fat and happy, is a fatalistic approach to life. And I saw very quickly that was not her plight. And as I later went on to study at Tufts and use family members as case studies to understand how could these moments been reversed. And so that was what led me to really pursue and see how I can make a difference. I didn't know food and nutrition as a field. I mean, sure, the lunch lady, but an actual science with rigor and research, no. That took much into really my post-college freshman year working at Texas Children with Dr. Steve Abrams, who was a neonatologist, clinical nutrition researcher. And I'm like, wow, only after that, nutrition became a science in my mind and not just cooking in the home and serving at the gatherings. And that was forever impactful going back to Oklahoma State and changing my major from biology to human nutrition, and the rest is history.
Thank you. Let's get into the history of what you call food freedom fighters on the front lines of the social justice movement. I know that your organization honors Georgia Gilmore and the contributions that she made. Can you talk a little bit about her and the legacy that she leaves us today?
Yeah, if nothing else, remember that she fed, fueled, and funded the movement. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came down to Montgomery, Alabama, at the height of the bus cop movement, he called upon those in the community of how do you use your God-given skills and talents to serve? And she answered the call. She didn't know how to be this orator or leading and organizing in the march. But what she did know, and everyone knew her well from her meals that she cooked professionally for businesses in the area, was to gather other women and create the Club from Nowhere. That became, in essence, if Harriet was here today, would have blessed it and anointed it as this underground movement of food freedom fighters, of being able to make meals to sustain people and nourish them on their plight for civil rights, but at the same time be able to raise funds to help fund the movement that was desperately needed. And then you had the need to just lead in your own homes with what you had, making the most of it. And she did that quite well. And for many of us who see kitchens as sites of trauma, when you think about Antebellum South, when I think about my own ancestor, Henrietta, who had to be that help in Navarro County, Texas in the mid-1800s, and how we turned these sites into resistance, into testimonies, into resiliency. And that's what she did. And I think she became really a hallmark for so many, and her history should not be forgotten. Her story must be remembered. And that is why we are honoring her through our sisterhood suppers and so many like her who may have fallen, but we will not forget as our cultural impact has been erased before our eyes today.
Thank you for raising up Miss Gilmore's contributions. I think that you're right. So many of the women in particular, but so many people who contributed to the civil rights movement have not had their dues. So really appreciate you lifting up Miss Gilmore. You talk a lot about the intersection of food and culture and the culture of the African diaspora and the contributions and power they have on our communities and the justice movement. Could you dive a little more into how these all work together to help build a modern civil rights movement?
Most definitely. I had the pleasure back in 2015 to be invited to the University of Pretoria. I was there to give lectures, and it was a historical moment. The students were leading protests. The fees must fall. Prices on university fees were increasing. And I was amazed that the little bit of Afrikaans that I had learned from being in Polokwane, I came and was able to enter onto campus after having just met with faculty members and shared that in the 75 years history of University of Pretoria, they've never had the school shut down. So I never gave a lecture. But what I saw reminded me of the work here. And it was law students not handing out a bag of chips and neon drinks, but oranges and water, things that actually were nourishing, that would be nutrition approved, RD approved, of what will sustain you in these fights. And so the best way to sum it up is that movements don't survive just on slogans alone. They survive on meals, on memory, and on mutual care. And what we see before us is the importance of community building at a time when governments fail us. We look to ourselves and our neighbors to build us, and we look to a common shared struggle and story that we can look and resiliently build the future that we desire. And unfortunately, sometimes it does take these moments of struggle to remind us why are we here, why the movement will always need to have that next generation to carry the torch, because in this attention economy, we quickly forget those who came and paved the way prior to the civil rights movement. You had post Reconstruction. And so there will always be a need to continue to know the past in order to move in our present, in order to keep a future worth living for the generations to come. And so food becomes that binder. We see this with Leah Chase at Dookie Chase's in New Orleans, became a site of organizers like Dr. King coming together. And so while we highlight Georgia, there's so many more Georgias that we need right now more than ever. As prices go high, we need supper clubs, sharing of meal together, to share the dialogues that are easy to have before our tables than it is to have between online communication. It is the broker of peace. If it wasn't, the term gastrodiplomacy would never have been created and used in State Department's diplomacy programs to help broker deals with foreign countries. And so we know that food can be weaponized, food can liberate us, but it also can bring us together to fight for the same common cause of freedom and peace.
Thank you. How do you see all that we're talking about integrating into the social justice movement of today? What parallels would you draw between the history of food and nutrition in the fight for justice and what you see happening across the country right now?
I would say that the fight has not changed, only the language and the platforms have. What I mean by that is the churches have been the sites of organizing in my grandparents' era. Now we find that social media platforms become another opportunity to build people power and organize. And that is now what I study at American University in my dissertation work, is being able to understand the power of online communities, hybrid communities, and how do we build democratic participation in a system that is quickly being surveillanced and weaponized, and understanding the fractures in the system that are unfolding before our eyes. And so the other part to this fight is understanding that if we do this work, we have to continue to sharpen our skills. I shared it at the American Public Health Association annual meeting, in a jam-packed room of those who began to realizing that as we're building public health leaders, they must have digital skills. They must understand that if public health can go away with a simple vote and being able to have someone wielding power, imagine what happens when you have a situation where everyday people just didn't take it serious and realize that you must reform the system, sharpen the skills, upskill, and now there's a whole task force dedicated to AI around how do we incorporate these skills in the public health movement. And so these same skills are being used when we look at our national security system and our armed forces, where you now have tech bros being four-star generals. That should tell you everything you need to know about if it is a national security urgency, then it also has to be an urgency in securing our public health and our food system in this country, as well as we shape domestic policy. And so there is no separation of understanding how the platforms of today are online and offline, and they're integrating in ways that we've never thought of before. And the AI tech policy that we need has to be embedded with people who think moral and ethically, and who understand the health and environmental implications of this work at the same time as the economic and political implications as well.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right that these paradigm shifts require a different set of skills for us to navigate them. And I'm so glad that your organization is doing work in this area. So let's talk about WANDA. You lead an organization, Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture. Can you talk a little bit about that work? I know you focus on reclaiming your history, rebuilding community, and releasing the shackles on our meals, quote unquote. What does that look like in the work that you do?
I would say that there were key moments that became clear that simply teaching people how to cook was not going to solve the problem. That my public health training definitely influenced my vision of how we need a set of Power Rangers with superpowers coming together, fighting for a more just, fair, and healthy, sustainable food system. And taking on that identity changed everything of how do we empower everyday people, in this case, women, our mothers, our aunties, our nanas, our sisters, to see themselves as food heroes. And that was sparked by my 4-year old having a cavity that I would say, as a mama, that wasn't me. But the teacher willingly gave junk food as rewards in the school. And I confronted, and she has children, and she said she would never condone that. So why these children in Ward 8? And so that became very clear to me that she did not see the full range of her identity in building children's well-being, and how food plays a role in that, in cultivating healthy eaters, readers, and leaders that we need in this society. And so instead of continuing to push for policy and education in our schools on my own, how could I build a collective, a movement around others who share the same belief as well? And so Wanda was born, one as a mascot, Little Wanda, that we have a patent on, because we needed a Smoky Bear for food systems. But at the same time, we needed to bring women who liberated themselves, I included, out of the kitchen, and realize actually the kitchen is the space to reclaim that once were sites of trauma that we now need to triumph and build new testimonies over. And so that became an important point, because in the narrative, we see chefs who have, especially in the Let's Move initiative, gain power, clout, potential, and shaping the narrative but yet they owe credence to their mothers and grandmothers. And I needed all of us to remember that. That those who were the original meal healers, cultural keepers, and culinary creators are the ones that have led the way for you to walk into those kitchens and claim your rightful space. And so for us, leadership looks like one, owning that sense of identity, believing that we have a shared purpose of building healthy communities, that if we do not, this notion that Karen Washington coins food apartheid becomes almost like the spreading of a pandemic. It is one, actually. And we have to not only train the dwindling workforce in public health and in nutrition with upskills that they need to really fight the good fight of fast food marketing that are now online in the mobile phones that the children have, but also in the content that we give and changing the narrative that even if we celebrate Black history through food, how does it have asset-based modeling versus deficit-based modeling, and even the messages that you share? And how do we ensure that we keep the flavor and the culture and know that the food should not rid ourselves of our own identities? Claude Fisher talks about this around food identity, but it is one that the food should reflect our identity and strength of those who've been able to be resilient in spite of and still keep the culture alive. And so the part of realizing that beyond the leadership, beyond the storytelling, which is our medicine, the community meals that we gather together around Sisterhood Supper become sites of collective action as well. And that is the other part that we know to be true. And this is where the history reminds us that we simply don't just break bread and heal a meal, that how do we ensure that our neighbors also are getting the support they need? And that is the advocacy, the policy. As we enjoy this meal, how do we remember those, our ancestors that allowed us to be here, and remember our children who need to also have a table in the future to be welcome to, and how we can play a role to ensure that happens.
Tambra, this is sounds amazing. I'm so thrilled to learn about your organization, and I'm sure our listeners want to know more about the kinds of work and initiatives that you're doing at WANDA.
Yes. For Black History Month, we have been encouraging those to pledge to host a sisterhood supper. The point of them is to be able to create space for, imagine a community health intervention, that your table can now become not only remixing recipes and designing menus, but also share conversations where you break down the barriers and bring about the conversations that you can finally have around food with intention. And from there, how can your guests play a role in putting the seed into the next generation by way of supporting our WANDA Scholars Program? Back in 2022, during the pandemic, we thought of how do we truly speak to this notion of multi-generational impact. We've been doing convenings. Our biggest conference was on food as medicine in the Black community in partnership with Johns Hopkins just in 2024. But then we said, let's create an endowment. We did that at Oklahoma State University, my alma mater. One of our board members in Nigeria was like, that sounds like an amazing program. Why not bring that here to Nigeria as well? And so for the last now 4 years, we've been supporting every nutrition student, a woman who has been impacted financially, to ensure that they don't have to worry about tuition and fees and going to Baru University in Kano, Nigeria, where I trace my heritage back to the Fulanis. And so as my way of, as a descendant and giving back, I didn't want to just simply travel to Nigeria to have this experience in the village, or Ruga, as we say in Hausa, but to be able to give back with purpose and meaning and impact. And so the WANDA Scholars Program will have its first set of graduates at the university, which their academic nutrition program is barely 5 years, 6 years old. And so to be able to say that when people ask around, go ask WANDA, literally on campus, if you want to study nutrition and don't have to worry about the financial expenses involved. We also have collaborations with other local nonprofits to provide mentorship, life skills training. And at the time when we did have Voice of America or VOA Hausa covering the launch of the event on campus, it instilled pride into the families and knowing that their children now represented a seed of hope in the community. And so that's what we mean about building that bridge of seeing food heroes, not just here in the US, but abroad. And so last year we were intentional in building those bridges with diasporans in Europe, from Paris to Belgium to the UK, and identifying other Black women-led food organizations, sharing platforms, speaking together about how do we strengthen women, supporting women initiatives, and build really a collective to really make an impact. And so it's been amazing to see what that can look like. And even this year, for the fourth year in a row, we've been sponsors of the Black Women in Food Summit here in Washington, D.C. And so we'll be leading a panel on food as medicine and be making an announcement on one of the initiatives that we're continuing to pledge and move forward in the food as medicine space. And how does that show up through our cultural foods, both here and abroad, is a really important part to our work. So while we, yes, championing for the visibility, the amplification, the role that women of color of African descent must play in the food system in securing their coin credits and credentials that were consistently denied to their ancestors, that we also must champion the very foods that represent the political economy and opportunity to help sustain our communities as well. And the food must have a seat at the table just as the women and girls. And so those are the two parts of our mission that we continue to champion for here and abroad as we expand and host sisterhood suppers. Now we've done them from Ghana to Kenya to the UK to Belgium. And soon we'll be in Texas next month for Nutrition Month, hosting events and speaking at medical schools, specifically UT Southwestern, around food as medicine and our stories as medicine. With the work that I'm doing at AU, my focus is being at the intersection between food, health, and communication, and how the narratives that we tell ourselves at an individual level and a collective is so critically important in how we see and give hope in this fight that we must sustain ourselves with the nutrition that we need, but also sustain ourselves and the psychological warfare that's at play, and understanding that we must be stronger together. And narrative work is critically important at a time like now. And that's why this podcast matters.
Thank you. And I love the holistic approach that you're taking to all of this, tying together so many important elements of communications, nutrition, community. And I think it's a real unique contribution. So thank you for that. I know lots of our listeners would love to get involved. So maybe you can talk to us about how people would get involved and maybe some of the things that you have coming up as opportunities.
Most definitely. We are continuing open for symbiotic kinds of partnerships that we've been building at the top of this year and will continue to build into the year. But one way to start is, one, follow us across social media. We're active, posting daily across LinkedIn, IG, Facebook, but also they can donate, because as we know, the funding cuts happening, that putting your money where your mouth counts in terms of the things that you believe in becomes critically important, and it's a tax write-off. And so folks can go to our website, iamwanda.org/fund to donate, but also they can host a sisterhood supper and sign up. And we still continue to host our signature programs during Juneteenth and Kwanzaa here in Washington, D.C. Those events are always free to the public to attend. It's a joyous occasion and just putting together gatherings and giving back into the community, but also join us at the many conferences that we participate in. Black Women in Food registration is open, as well as the UT Southwestern, their Community Engagement Symposium coming up. but also we're building space for children edutainment content from farm to health with our character Little Wanda. We struck a partnership with National Farm to School Network. So we were in New Mexico last year, and we're continuing to build out what that can look like and how our educational content can also support our healthy food brands out there and find alignment so we can be better together. Because Little Wanda wants to be a champion of children being these healthy eaters, readers, and leaders, but she also needs the village to get behind her and in ensuring that this work is sustained. And so that's the other exciting part as I wrap up my research, is to put dedicated effort behind her and continue to champion through the need to build community around the dinner table is another intervention that we're focused on as well.
Thank you. On
Mhm.
another note,
Yep.
did did I notice, that I can find recipes on your website?
The recipe for social change. But I'm glad you brought that up. So, one thing that we've been pushing through our sisterhood suppers, through the Wanda Academy, we educate women, most recently birth workers last year with our maternal food is medicine program. But yes, we have a dietitian, chefs, and we would teach them how to remix their own recipes. I know it's a thing to hand out recipes, but it's a very passive approach. And what we've learned through our work is that we actually continue to say all you need is already within. If you go to your family members, find the recipes of your grandmother, your mother, your auntie, those need to be documented. And then how do we, with the help of our dietitians, be able to help preserve the core cultural element of those recipes, but spin it to make sure that you have health sustained. And so we want people to realize that you don't have to give up who you are in order to continue to achieve longevity and a good life. So that is to me a critical message in our own communities, that a lot of times that we say the Mediterranean diet is the best diet, but it's just like, well, there's so many diets around the world. Who's to say that all these people that have lived, I mean, my grandma's is 99 this month in Oklahoma City. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And so, as she approaches becoming a centenarian, there's something to be said about what has sustained her growing up in Rentisville and these other Black farming towns across her state. And how do we preserve that history as much as we want to help change and build a better future? We have to remember our past in order to move forward. So, those who wish to be a part of the Sisterhood Supper Community Cookbook Project can submit recipes in order for us to show this time capsule of how we used food as a sisterhood to sustain ourselves.
Thank you. Can you share a favorite recipe?
Well, a go-to that I've learned and I've taught my other children is a sauteed okra and tomatoes. I've grew up like most in the South, learning as what we say fried diet and laid to the side food, and so I only knew fried okra growing up. And so in Low Country, Carolina, obviously an iron skillet with chopped okra, tomatoes and onions and garlic with a little bit of vinegar or lemon, even better, with seasoning, is a great dish with a piece of fish and rice. And so I convinced my kid to eat okra from having her cook in the kitchen with me in an episode I filmed for the U.S. Botanic Garden. And those videos are available on YouTube that people can check out. Food for the soul. But I definitely enjoyed that dish. We have it in the kitchen right now. And so okra, for people who want a little bit of history, is that Queen of Sheba enjoyed having radiant skin. They called them the lady fingers. And now there's a source, she has okra water. I have that in the kitchen as well. And so okra is one of those untapped beauty foods in many ways. And I make sure I am intentional in eating that along with my black eyed peas, fiber in our diets. And these are foods, our beans, our greens, our grains. Is fundamentally the holy trinity of fiber that we need, that we have to remember as we have colon cancer that's impacting younger and younger folks.
Well, I'm sure you just converted a lot of people to the idea of eating okra, so thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to mention that we haven't asked about that you want our audience to know?
Well, I hope they walk away and realize with their own eyes of what has happened in this past year that food justice is a civil rights issue. It's a human rights issue. And with any rights, they must be protected, they must be fought for. They are not given naturally, unfortunately. And the fight is only going to intensify. And while we have had a moment of comfort, Lovey Ajayi Jones said it best in her viral TED Talk that we have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And for those who understand history, those who got too comfortable did not survive. And so we must take on that armor of protection, of being of service in our communities now more than ever. And I hope that we walk away with getting uncomfortable because the time is now to pick up the fight.
Thank you. There's much work to be done, and appreciate you being on the front lines, Tambra, in this fight for food justice, especially in these times.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Tambra Stevenson of WANDA, Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture. You can learn more about the organization and how to get involved by visiting their website at iamwanda.org. This has been another episode of Voices to End Hunger. You can email us with questions and comments at podcast@alliancetoendhunger.org. This episode was produced and edited by Nate McGrath. I'm Minerva Delgado. See you next time.